Hello and welcome back to my channel. This fairy tale is called The Grim Brother by Audrey Faye. Some say children can't be evil. I know differently. I stand here looking at the fresh mound of earth in front of my sister's gravestone and know that I have buried evil in consecrated ground. For a priest, there is no greater sin. For the man standing in the place where I commended her soul to God, I don't know what to feel. If she had a soul, it had long since been promised elsewhere. It is not hell I fear, but rather that my sister waits for me there. I am long past redemption, perhaps all those many years ago when we returned from our disappearance. Perhaps then the truth might have saved my soul. I'll never know. I only know that as a boy of 7, I saw evil act, and she took my voice. My sister killed a woman. That's no secret. People still tell stories about the 2 young children kidnapped and held hostage for an entire fortnight. How we suffered so terribly and escaped only when my sister fought to save me and killed the terrible woman who had held us. My sister lived out her life basking in the deference that comes as reward for such a moment of bravery. I have lived in the quiet shame of an older brother who needed to be rescued by his little sister. It's not the only reason I sought sanctuary in the priesthood, but the church's deep relationship with guilt and shame was certainly part of my calling. As a priest, I seek to expiate the guilt of others and bring them closer to our God, the Father. I do not expect the same for myself. Some things, even God, can surely not forgive. My friend Gregor would say this is heresy. It is a conversation we have had for most of a lifetime, beginning when we were students, with the Jesuits in Alamonque. With all those miles between me and my sister, it was very easy to agree with him for a time. He was my true friend, but even Gregor does not know the whole truth. It is a truth I've never told anyone, and now the only other person who knows it is dead. In my defence, I did not expect people to believe my sister's story. Who would believe that a small child killed a grown woman, even in self-defence? Or that we wandered around in the woods for days, but my sister managed never to drop the jewels clutched in her hands? It seems belief is not so hard when the tale is told by a small blonde child with traumatised eyes and a fortune in a grasp. Our father certainly never questioned her, not even when our much unloved stepmother sickened and died only days after our return, along with the unborn babe in her womb. The story people tell now says she was dead and gone before we got back. It's not true. I don't know exactly what my sister did. I only know that when she held our father's hand at the funeral, her eyes were happy. No one else seems to see her eyes. Her eyes were happy when we watched the old woman fall too. It was my fault. Has always been my fault. I'm the one who took my sister to the house on the hill. We were hungry, and there was little work for my father. His new wife had a baby on the way. My mother died giving birth to my sister. Perhaps she understood, but evil moved in her womb. The house on the hill was fancy. It had flower gardens, real glass in all the windows. I thought the old woman who lived there might have some food to spare. My sister was pretty, so people often gave her scraps instead of the cuff to the head they gave me. The old woman answered the door herself. I sometimes wonder if that's why my sister always made sure there were servants in her house. Living alone is dangerous. You never know what might come to the door. She was kind, the old woman, Perhaps my burden would be less if she hadn't been so kind to two hungry children. She seated us at her table, fed us bread with real butter and jam. I've never been able to eat blueberry jam since. It tastes of death and cowardice. My sister told the sad tale of our family. The new baby coming and not enough food on the table, our pittance of a house, small and very draughty in the cold of winter. We were blessed with a moment of uncommon kindness that day. The old woman had a house in the woods, she said. Just a cottage, but warm and dry, with two small bedrooms, just the right size for two growing children. It had belonged to her family for generations, but only she remained. I remember when she smiled at me and asked if I thought we might like to come look at the cottage. I was certain we had met our fairy godmother. My sister shared my joy. Whatever evil stirred in her, it had not yet awakened when she took the old woman's hand for a walk in the woods. I believe now that the presence of good has simply triggered the need for evil to act. Gregor convinced me of this eternal truth. The force of evil gathered for the birth of the only son. It is a story humanity repeats far too often. At 7, however, I knew only that kindness faced down death and lost. The cottage in the woods was sturdy and well maintained, like the one I remembered from when we were very small, when there was still work for my father. It had a cosy, welcoming kitchen, 3 whole bedrooms. Outside were sheds for animals, if we had any, and a small root cellar. The path of some lives in determined by a single moment, you know. Gregor reminds me often that the doctrine of predestination isn't meant to be interpreted severely or seriously. It wasn't there when the old woman peered down the steps into the root cellar and my sister pushed her. It wasn't there when my sister closed the door of the root cellar and led me back through the woods. It wasn't there when we sat down at the table in the big house on the hill and ate more bread and butter and blueberry jam. If God intended for one such as I to go to heaven, such moments would never have happened. I do not know if the old woman was dead when she fell. That is perhaps the most heinous of my crimes. I might have saved her. No, I will never know. We stayed in the house on the hill for 13 days. We left only once in the dark of night. It took us a long time to drag the old woman out of the root cellar and into the cottage kitchen. She was small, we were strong, from holding wood with our father, but it still took an eternity. I will never forget the cold, papery skin or her staring eyes. In death, they were no longer kind. I didn't know why we had to move the old woman until my sister spun our lies after our return. I only knew that her eyes were very scary, and I did as I was told. I slept very little those 13 days, but I ate a lot. Then 70 years later, sleep still eludes me many nights, and food finds me all too often. When we had consumed everything edible in the house, my sister looked for something to sell. She found the old woman's jewellery, and we sat at the table carefully taking the stones from their settings. Once you've been accessory to murder, the burden of theft hardly ripples your soul. Those jewels bought my sister a fancy life. You might think she killed for them, but the old woman had been dead for more than a week by the time the jewels were found. In 70 years, I've never really understood what turned my sister irredeemably from the light. After disappearing for a fortnight, our return was big news to our little village on the Rhine. My sister spun a story of witchcraft and kidnapping, insanity and escape. The old woman's remains in the kitchen of the cottage in the woods. Well, that seemed proof enough. I remember very little of the next year. Soon enough I was sent away to school in Devonshire, and after that to the Jesuits in Allemagne, where I met Gregor. That my education was paid for by the old woman's jewels is amongst the more minor of my sins. While I found some peace at school, happiness was not mine to seek. My small group of friends called me the grim brother. Gregor could often tease a smile from me. Few others ever managed. It was not an accident. I think that my schools were too far to permit frequent travel home. I saw my sister but a few times before she married, and then again at the funeral that left her a young widow. She attended my ordination, perhaps needing to witness my vows of poverty and chastity. My obedience had already been very well established. I am a good priest. It does not atone for my sins, but it sometimes gives small solace in the night. Not too many of my congregation fall asleep when I speak. Some come to the rectory to talk. The children listen to my stories, and one or two will climb on my lap. My sister never had children. In my later years, this is something for which I thanked God every day. My friend Gregor, after many years of work with his pea plants, believes that children inherit the characteristics of their parents. I do not know how much of my sister's blood runs in my veins, but it is good the line will end with us. I was not there when she died. It was not in me to grant her final absolution. I don't believe God wants her back. In my dreams, when he sits in judgment, Son of Man on his right, and the kind old lady on his left, he does not want me back either. I buried my sister today, and, at the end of a lifetime of blackness and despair, I do not know what to feel. People nod and smile, and repeat the words she wanted etched on her gravestone. Gretel Nussbaum. Such bravery. They have sent a small child now to fetch me back to the rectory. Come, Father Hansel, she says. It is time for the bread and for the soup. Her eyes are kind, just like a young girl's should forever be. The end. And if you haven't worked it out already, guys, that is the twisted tale of Hansel and Gretel and how it should be rather than what it is now. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.